Imagine, right? Imagine committing this horrific crime, and your star accomplice, the one who helped you plan every single meticulous detail, who literally stood by your side the entire time, they just instantly turn you in to the police the absolute second they arrive.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened to the suspect in today's case. But the terrifying twist here is that his accomplices, they weren't human.
No, they were not.
Right. They were his luxury electric car and an artificial intelligence chatbot.
It's completely wild. Welcome to today's Deep Dive, everyone. We are incredibly glad to have you here with us. Today, we're unpacking an investigation that honestly feels like it was ripped straight from some dystopian sci-fi novel.
It really does, but it's a very real, very tragic reality. We're looking at a scenario where the silent, inanimate objects around us are no longer just, the backdrop to a crime. They are active, unimpeachable witnesses.
Exactly. We are examining the deeply disturbing murder of a teenage girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And the suspect right at the center of this whole technological hurricane is a young man known across the media landscape simply as D4vd. Yeah, just spelled with a 4 instead of an A, David.
And the media footprint on this case is just massive, and for good reason, really. It forces us to confront this deeply unsettling intersection between ancient, visceral human violence and, well, the sterile, hyper-connected digital surveillance state we all live in today.
Yeah, and to make sense of that intersection for you, we have spent the last few weeks synthesizing a mountain of source material. We're pulling from the empathetic, victim-centered investigative breakdowns over on the Kendall Ray channel.
Which are excellent, by the way.
They really are.
Yeah.
We've also got the rapid-fire procedural updates from True Crime News, and of course, the intense gavel-to-gavel courtroom bombshells that have been dominating the Law and Crime Network and Court TV.
So our mission today isn't just to recount the headlines you might have scrolled past on your phone. It's to dig into the mechanisms beneath them, right? We want to explain exactly how modern technology is trapping criminals who, quite frankly, think they are outsmarting the system.
Right, and why the illusion of digital privacy is basically the most dangerous blind spot a modern offender can have.
Yeah, that illusion is just so pervasive. People operate under this false assumption that if they can't physically see a camera pointing at them, they aren't being watched.
But the reality of modern forensics is that the camera is often the absolute least of a suspect's worries. It's the invisible data streams, right? The server logs, the telemetry packets that are quietly sealing their fate.
Exactly, which brings us right to the heart of this tragedy and the factual groundwork that was laid out so brilliantly by the Kendall Ray coverage.
Yeah, her video, which is titled Teen Girl Found in D4vd's Tesla, breaking down the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case so far, it serves as this core anchor point for our understanding of the initial crime scene.
And we really need to pause here for a second because Kendall Ray's platform operates on a very specific, crucial ethos, which is putting the victims first.
Always.
Right. In a media ecosystem that often just, hyperfixates on the psychology of the offender, that focus is a necessary corrective. It grounds the entire conversation.
It completely does. Without centering the victim, true crime risks becoming this sterile intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
Or even worse, just perverse entertainment.
Yeah, the technological marvels of the forensic work only matter because a human life was stolen.
Right. So for you listening right now, I really want us to take a moment to truly center Celeste Rivas Hernandez in this narrative. She was a young teenage girl.
She was in that incredibly vibrant, chaotic phase of life where you are just starting to figure out who you actually are.
Exactly. She had infinite potential, blank pages left to right, and all of it was abruptly and violently cut short. This isn't just a story about a cool car or a smart AI.
Yeah.
It is a devastating loss for a family, for a peer group,
Yeah.
for a community that is now just left with this unfillable void. Every single piece of digital evidence we discuss today has to be viewed through the lens of that profound, irreversible loss.
Well said. The gravity of what happened to Celeste is the engine driving the justice system's mobilization of all these resources. The meticulous extraction of data is ultimately an act of advocacy for her.
Yeah. And the physical reality of where she was found is it's a jarring, horrific juxtaposition. Celeste was discovered hidden inside D4vd's Tesla.
Right.
And when we think of a Tesla, or really any modern luxury EV, the immediate association is a pristine, high-tech environment, right? It's a status symbol.
Oh, absolutely. It's marketed as a clean, sustainable spaceship on wheels, complete with vegan leather and that massive glowing touchscreen in the middle.
It's the aesthetic of the frictionless future.
Yeah.
So the discovery of a body inside one, it's this horrifying clash of modern sterile luxury and primal visceral violence. A Tesla utilizes a tomb.
It just fundamentally does not compute in our brains.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Which leads me to a theory I've been kicking around while reading these sources for the deep dive. I have to assume that someone attempting to hide a crime in a high-tech EV must possess a fundamental misunderstanding of the hardware.
How so?
Well, like, maybe they assume that if they don't type a destination into the GPS, or if they put the car in some sort of offline camp mode, the car essentially goes dark, right? They treat it like a metal box, like a regular car from the 90s.
Oh, I see what you mean.
But from a purely mechanical standpoint, that has to be a catastrophic miscalculation.
Oh, catastrophic is putting it mildly. To believe that you can simply turn off a modern vehicle's awareness is an astonishing display of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Where someone's lack of knowledge makes them wildly overestimate their competence.
Exactly that. If we strip away the sleek exterior of a modern vehicle, particularly a Tesla, what you're actually looking at is a rolling data center wrapped in aluminum. They do not go dark.
Never.
Never. They are designed from the ground up to be continuous, unblinking surveillance devices.
Okay, let's pull the curtain back on that for a second. Because when we say surveillance device, I think most people listening immediately jump to GPS.
Sure, yeah. Location tracking.
Right, they think, okay, the car knows I drove to the grocery store. But the true crime news sources we looked at highlight a much deeper level of data extraction. So how deep does this telemetry actually go?
It goes down to the millisecond. And it measures physical interactions you don't even realize you are having. Modern cars operate on something called a CAN bus, C-A-N. It stands for Controller Area Network.
Okay, what does that actually do?
It's essentially a central nervous system for the vehicle. Every single microchip, sensor, and motor talks to each other constantly over this network. So yes, it tracks GPS coordinates, but it also records the precise angle of the steering wheel at any given moment.
Wow.
Yeah, it records the exact percentage of pressure applied to the accelerator and the brake pedal. It knows if the headlights are on, if a door handle is actuated, and the ambient temperature inside and outside the cabin.
So it's not just a map of where the car went. It's a three-dimensional, time-stamped recreation of how the driver behaved in that space.
Precisely. And in a homicide investigation involving the transport or concealment of a body, the most damning sensors aren't the cameras, they are the weight sensors in the seats.
Wait, the bladders that trigger the seatbelt alarms, like when you put a heavy backpack on the passenger seat and it beeps at you?
Exactly those. Automakers install these highly sensitive pressure bladders in the seats to determine if an airbag should deploy with the force required for a 200-pound adult, or if it should be disabled entirely because a 20-pound child seat is resting there.
Oh, that makes sense for safety.
Right. But these sensors don't just measure weight in a vacuum. They log the exact timestamp of when that mass was introduced to the seat, when it shifted, and when it was removed.
Oh, wow. So if a suspect moves a victim into the passenger seat or the trunk, the car's computer system is quietly writing a time-stamped log of that physical mass entering the vehicle.
Yes. The CAN bus logs say, at 2:14 a.m. and 36 seconds, 120 pounds of static mass was introduced to the real passenger side. To an investigator, this is the absolute holy grail.
Because you can't argue with it.
Right. It is a digital eyewitness that cannot be intimidated, it cannot be cross-examined into confusion by a defense attorney, and it absolutely does not forget.
And we actually saw the lethal efficiency of this exact technology in another case deeply covered in our source stack by True Crime News, didn't we? The Mackenzie Shirilla case.
Ah, yes. The 100 mph murder.
That case was chilling. For those listening who might not remember the specifics of it, she was a teenager who drove her car into a brick building at literally 100 miles per hour, killing her boyfriend and another passenger.
Yeah, horrific scene.
And her initial defense was incredibly reliant on the narrative of a tragic accident, right?
Yeah.
That she lost control of the vehicle, maybe her foot slipped on the pedal, she panicked, that kind of thing.
It was a narrative that might have worked perfectly in, say, 1995. You have a horrific crash scene, no eyewitnesses, and a surviving driver claiming a loss of control. A standard accident reconstruction might leave room for reasonable doubt.
But the vehicle she was driving contained an event data recorder, right? An EDR.
Yes. It's essentially the automotive equivalent of an airplane's black box.
And when forensic mechanics pulled the data from that black box, it completely obliterated her defense, didn't it?
It dismantled it line by line. The EDR data didn't just show the vehicle's speed at the moment of impact. It showed a deliberate, sustained pedal-to-the-metal acceleration in the final 5 seconds before the crash.
Wow.
More importantly, it recorded a 0% input on the brake pedal. There was no attempt to stop. There was no loss of control. There was a calculated lethal intent translated right through the SAM bus. That raw data is what secured her murder conviction.
Which brings us right back to D4vd. Because D4vd fundamentally misunderstood that his car was silently recording his every move, his panic led him to a physical cover-up that was just as clumsy and ill-conceived as his digital footprint.
Right.
And for you listening, I want you to just think about your own daily commute for a second. Think about the last time you ran out to your car in the driveway just to grab a gym bag you forgot in the back seat.
Yeah, think about all the data points there.
Exactly. Your car logged the key fob proximity. It logged the door handle actuation, the interior light activation, the weight shift as you leaned your body in, and the door locking behind you when you left. The illusion of privacy in our vehicles is just a complete myth. We are driving multi-ton data loggers.
And this technological illiteracy on D4vd's part is fascinating from a psychological standpoint.
How so?
Well, he purchased the aesthetic of the technology without possessing any real understanding of the reality of the technology. He treated a hyper-modern surveillance machine like a 1970s Chevy where you could just throw something in the trunk, lock it with a metal key, and walk away.
Which perfectly transitions us into the sheer, baffling absurdity of the physical cover-up in this case. Because if hiding a crime in a drivable supercomputer wasn't a massive enough unforced error, the way he attempted to mask it physically takes this case into a realm that is truly surreal.
Surreal and deeply revealing of a very specific type of cognitive collapse.
We are pulling these details straight from the Law and Crime Network coverage of the pre-trial hearings. And the chyrons on the screen during these broadcasts tell the story so vividly. They read D4D's air freshener cover-up claims, exposed in murder hearing, and disturbing discoveries inside D4D's Tesla revealed.
Yeah, those headlines are striking.
When I was reading through the transcripts of these hearings in our source stack, I actually found myself rereading paragraphs because my brain couldn't quite process the absurdity of it. We are talking about the use of dozens of commercial air fresheners, just standard, over-the-counter car deodorizers hung all over the interior of the vehicle.
In a desperate attempt to mask the biological reality of what was hidden inside.
Right. It is a stunning display of juvenile logic applied to a catastrophic reality.
It really is.
But why?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the smell of a decomposing body is notoriously overpowering. But my theory here is that this wasn't just a practical attempt to hide a smell. It was an attempt to regain control.
Go on.
Well, when you are sitting in the driver's seat of a car that has just become a major crime scene, your brain must be screaming with panic, right?
Yeah.
So is the act of buying 50 pine-scented trees and hanging them up almost a self-soothing mechanism. Like, if I can just make it smell like a car wash, the problem somehow goes away.
Your theory actually hits on a very well-documented phenomenon in criminal psychology.
Really?
Yeah. Under extreme acute stress, especially the kind of stress experienced by an amateur offender who suddenly finds themselves in a nightmare of their own, making the prefrontal cortex essentially shuts down.
And that's the part of the brain that handles logic and planning.
Yes, complex problem solving. The brain gets flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, inducing a severe state of tunnel vision. They experience an overwhelming cognitive load.
So higher-order reasoning just evaporates.
Completely. They lose the ability to project consequences into the future. Instead, the brain regresses to immediate, granular problem solving using whatever mundane, everyday tools are right there at their disposal.
The brain literally just says, bad smell, need air freshener.
Exactly. It is a localized, panicky attempt to regain the illusion of control over an uncontrollable environment.
But the irony, the massive glaring flaw in this logic, is that the human olfactory system, especially the highly trained olfactory system of a law enforcement officer, doesn't just register bad smells. It registers anomalies.
That's a crucial point.
I remember reading that our brains evolved to notice things that are out of place in our environment as a survival mechanism. Pumping 50 chemical pine or floral scents into a sterile, airtight leather interior isn't masking anything. It's creating a giant olfactory anomaly.
It is the exact equivalent of trying to hide in a dark forest by lighting a distress flare. Police officers and crime scene investigators operate on a highly calibrated baseline of what constitutes normal in any given environment. A car might smell like stale coffee, maybe some dog hair or slight mildew, but an overwhelming chemical wall of masking agents breach, heavy solvents, or a dozen air fresheners is an immediate blaring siren.
It tells the investigator, someone is expending a massive amount of energy to hide something in this specific space.
Precisely. Instead of neutralizing the suspicion, he acted as his own neon sign.
And when we compare this panicked, clumsy behavior to the history of true crime, it creates a really illuminating contrast. If we look at the historical profiles covered extensively by the Crime and Investigation Network in our source stack figures like Harold Shipman, the British physician, or John Wayne Gacy.
Oh, the differences in how offenders operate across eras are staggering.
Right. Those two represent the apex of undetected, sustained criminality, and the environment they operated in was the key to their longevity. Shipman is believed to have murdered hundreds of his own patients over decades. Gacy murdered over 30 young men and buried the majority of them in the crawl space directly beneath his own home. And they got away with it for years.
Years and years.
And I think the natural temptation for a lot of people is to say, well, they were just criminal masterminds, and modern criminals like D4vd are just stupid. But it's not just a difference in intellect, is it? It's a profound difference in the architecture of the era.
It is entirely an environmental difference. Shipman and Gacy operated in the analog era. They integrated their crimes into the fabric of their everyday, respected lives in ways that didn't immediately trigger systemic alarms.
Like Shipman weaponizing his status as a doctor.
Right. He weaponized the inherent trust society places in a physician. He forged analog death certificates that were filed away in physical filing cabinets, largely unscrutinized by cross-referencing databases because those databases didn't exist.
And Gacy utilized his own property. And yes, there were eventually complaints from his wife and his employees about a strange smell emanating from the crawl space.
But he didn't hang 50 air fresheners in the living room to fix it.
Exactly. He just blamed it on moisture or broken sewer pipe, and in the 1970s, people largely accepted that.
The analog era possessed a remarkably high tolerance for mundane excuses because the investigative resources required to dig deeper were just massive. There was no environmental surveillance, there were no digital footprints. To catch Gacy, law enforcement had to physically follow him, stake out his house, and manually connect the dots of missing persons reports filed in different jurisdictions on actual paper.
Contrast that with today. D4vd is operating in a digital panopticon. He is leaving a primitive, clumsy trail of physical evidence, the air fresheners, in an era that demands absolute, terrifying perfection to go undetected.
The air freshener defense is the physical manifestation of his complete inability to comprehend the reality of the surveillance net he was caught in.
Which brings us to the most unprecedented aspect of this surveillance net. We've covered the vehicle telematics, we've covered the bizarre physical cover-up, but now we have to look at the digital premeditation. We have to talk about consulting the oracle.
This is where the case truly breaks new ground.
This is the part of the deep dive that genuinely made my jaw drop. The technological bombshell. The court TV coverage featured a headline that I really think will define the next decade of criminal jurisprudence. It read, "His ChatGPT messages would come back to haunt him."
We are officially in uncharted territory here.
We are. We are talking about the legal, ethical, and mechanical implications of a suspect utilizing artificial intelligence, specifically large language models like ChatGPT, to workshop, plan, or attempt to cover up a homicide.
It is a watershed moment. It represents a fundamental shift in how intent is documented and prosecuted in the modern age.
And it is so incredibly ironic. Think about it from the perspective of the suspect. You think you are leveraging the most cutting-edge intelligence in human history to perfectly execute a crime. You essentially recruit a brilliant encyclopedic accomplice.
Right.
But the very second law enforcement serves a warrant, that AI accomplice turns state's witness and cheerfully hands the prosecution a complete time-stamped blueprint of your guilt.
The diary illusion is what traps them.
Explain that, because I think for you listening, this is the most critical takeaway about our modern relationship with technology. I know I've been guilty of this exact thing. You open an app on your phone, you have this minimalist little chat window, and you type in a question while sitting alone in your bedroom.
It feels incredibly intimate.
It does. It feels like a closed loop between you and a glowing screen.
It feels like writing in a private journal with a little brass lock on it. But large language models are explicitly designed by engineers to foster this false sense of intimacy. They're programmed to be conversational, accommodating, non-judgmental, and endlessly helpful.
Right.
When an AI responds to you with conversational empathy, your brain subconsciously categorizes it as a trusted confidant. But mechanically, technologically, it is the exact opposite of a diary.
Mechanically, you're standing in a crowded room with a megaphone.
Precisely. Let's break down the actual mechanism of a query. When a user types a prompt into ChatGPT, let's say, theoretically, what chemicals break down human DNA and hit send, that text does not process on their iPhone. The phone simply doesn't have the computational power.
So where does it go?
That query is packaged into a data packet and transmitted over the open internet to a massive, warehouse-sized server farm, likely located in another state entirely.
It's cloud computing, not edge computing.
Exactly. At that server farm, the query is ingested, processed through the neural network, an answer is generated and sent back. But the vital piece of this process for law enforcement is that the query doesn't vanish once the answer is delivered.
It's stored.
It is meticulously logged. It is tied to the user's account profile. It is tethered to their device's unique MSC address, their IP address, and it is time-stamped down to the millisecond.
So from a legal perspective, how does a detective actually get those logs? Because tech companies are always touting their privacy policies in their commercials.
Well, tech companies have robust privacy policies for marketing data, but they are fully subservient to the legal mechanisms of the Stored Communications Act. If a detective has probable cause, say, a victim found in a suspect's car, they present that to a judge.
And the judge signs off?
The judge signs a search warrant or a subpoena directed at the AI company, compelling them to turn over the account data associated with the suspect's phone number or IP address.
And the company actually complies. They don't fight it.
They absolutely comply. They hand over a digital dossier containing the full text transcripts of every conversation that user had with the AI.
Which is the absolute holy grail for a prosecutor. Because in criminal law, proving that someone committed an act is only half the battle, right? You have to prove the mens rea.
Yeah, the guilty mind, yes. Proving intent, proving premeditation, is historically the most difficult hurdle in a murder trial. Usually, prosecutors have to weave together circumstantial evidence, like he bought a shovel on Tuesday, he canceled his plans on Wednesday, therefore he planned the murder. It requires the jury to make logical leaps.
But an AI server log completely removes the leap.
It entirely removes the leap. By asking an AI for help in planning a crime or a cover-up, a suspect is quite literally drafting their own premeditation timeline in plain text.
That is wild.
They are providing the prosecution with an unerasable chronological record of their exact thought process. It moves the concept of intent from a legal theory into a hard empirical fact that a prosecutor can project onto a 60-inch screen in front of a jury.
What I find so fascinating about this, though, is that while the technology of the AI is completely novel, the core human flaw driving it is as old as time. When we look across the broader true crime media landscape in our sources, this digital hubris is the defining trend of modern criminality.
Oh, definitely. The intrinsic human desire to document oneself is the downfall of the modern offender.
Yes. Look at the incredible coverage by that chapter included in our stack. They did a deep dive on a case with the headline, TikTok vlog accidentally reveals horrifying killer couple. Or look at the storytelling from Mr. Ballin, who covered the hidden VHS tape that changed everything.
The medium evolves, but the narcissism remains static.
Exactly. In the 1980s and 90s, arrogant, sadistic killers recorded themselves on VHS camcorders, hiding the tapes in their ceilings, convinced of their own invincibility. 10 years ago, they were posting cryptic confessions on Facebook.
And today?
Today, they're accidentally catching the reflection of a crime scene in a TikTok dance video.
Yeah.
Or they're literally workshopping the logistics of a felony with ChatGPT. The technology upgrades from magnetic tape to neural networks, but the arrogant need of the criminal to document their own brilliance, to seek an audience or validation that remains exactly the same.
They cannot resist leaving a mark, even when that mark is the exact instrument of their destruction.
And that leads us to the most difficult and perhaps most disturbing phase of this deep dive, because the digital footprint perfectly captures the clinical, calculated intent of the crime, but the physical reality of the courtroom exposes the brutal, visceral reality of the act itself.
Yeah, and we should warn the listeners here.
I do want to warn you listening. The details we have to discuss next are deeply disturbing, but they are essential to understanding why the stakes of this trial have escalated so dramatically. We are looking at the law and crime coverage of the pretrial hearings.
The titles they used are incredibly stark.
They are Bombshell D4D hearing, Disturbing dismemberment details, and D4vd is bored as gruesome body parts are shown in court.
This is the moment in the legal process where the abstract, theoretical nature of the digital evidence collides head-on with the horrific physical violence inflicted on Celeste.
The juxtaposition painted by the reporters inside that courtroom is genuinely chilling. Let's try to unpack this scene for a second. You have the prosecution standing at the podium. They're presenting these unimaginably gruesome details of post-mortem dismemberment to the judge.
Right.
They are projecting evidentiary images that are likely traumatizing the seasoned reporters and legal staff in the gallery. The emotional weight in that room must be suffocating. And yet, sitting at the defense table, mere feet away from these images, is the suspect.
And multiple independent reports describe his demeanor not as panicked, not as remorseful, but as, well, bored. Smug, even.
It is a reaction that violently violates every established social norm and evolutionary expectation we have for human empathy. So we have to do a psychological deep dive here.
Yeah.
Put your behavioral science hat on for a second.
Okay.
Why would a defendant sitting in a courtroom where his literal life and freedom are on the line, facing the most horrific visual evidence imaginable, display a flat or bored effect? Is he just a monster?
Well, forensic psychologists generally look at 3 distinct possibilities for this kind of courtroom demeanor. And I'll tell you right now, none of them are good for the defense.
Of course one.
The first, and the one the public most readily assumes, is genuine psychopathy or severe antisocial personality disorder. This involves a fundamental neurological lack of effective empathy. The images do not bother him because his brain does not process the victim as a human being with inherent value.
How does he process her then?
He processes her as an object, and he processes the trial proceedings as a tedious inconvenience delaying his day.
Which is a terrifying concept to sit next to in a courtroom.
Truly.
Yeah.
Now, the second possibility, which is often argued by defense teams in these scenarios, is that the boredom is actually an extreme pathological coping mechanism.
Like a trauma response.
Yes. When faced with overwhelming trauma or the crushing reality of their own catastrophic actions being broadcast to the world, some individuals' nervous systems simply overload. They completely dissociate.
They just shut down.
They shut down all emotional effect to protect their psyche from entirely collapsing. So to an outside observer, it looks like callous boredom. But internally, it's an emotional flatline caused by massive psychological short-circuiting.
I can understand the clinical mechanics of that. I really can.
Yeah.
But given everything we just discussed about the ChatGPT planning, I have to propose a third option here. Is it possible that this boredom is born out of pure, arrogant detachment?
That is the third option. And in cases involving high levels of premeditation, it is often the most insidious. We call it delusional arrogance.
Delusional arrogance.
It's the deeply held belief that he is simply the smartest person in the room. Despite the fact that his air freshener cover-up was embarrassingly amateurish, and despite the fact that his AI accomplice handed the prosecution his exact plans, he may harbor this delusional belief that his digital intellect will somehow still save him.
So he looks bored because he thinks he's already won.
He genuinely believes the trial is a temporary formality before he outsmarts them all and walks free.
And for you listening to this right now, I want you to perform an empathy check. Put yourself in the shoes of a juror sitting in that box. The jury box is usually positioned so that jurors can easily observe both the witness stand and the defense table, right? It's designed for scrutiny.
It's a fishbowl.
Exactly. So how would you expect an innocent person to react if they were falsely accused of murder and forced to look at gruesome, dismembered images of a teenage girl?
You expect a visceral, involuntary display of humanity. You expect horror. You expect shock, nausea, a physical recoil. You expect them to weep or violently turn their eyes away.
Exactly. You expect them to mirror the horror of the jury. And when a jury, who is holding their breath while looking at these awful photos, glances over the defense table and sees a young man looking like he's waiting in line at the DMV, I have to imagine that seals a defendant's case faster than any server log or DNA swab.
Oh, it is often the nail in the coffin. Judges routinely instruct juries that they must base their verdicts strictly on the evidence presented, not on the defendant's emotional reactions.
But they're human.
Right. Juries are composed of human beings, not algorithms. They are biologically wired to read the room, to look for micro-expressions of guilt, remorse, or deception. Courtroom demeanor dominates true crime coverage specifically because it provides this unvarnished window into the defendant's psychological state.
We see this exact dynamic play out time and time again in the media sources we analyze for this deep dive.
We do. Just look at the intense court TV coverage of the Lindsay Clancy case or the Nolan Wells mystery.
Those were huge media circuses.
And in both of those cases, the media and the public hyperfixated on the emotional reactions of the accused. Were they wiping away tears? Were they looking down? Were they stoic?
Right. Everyone becomes an armchair psychologist.
The public puts these reactions under a microscope because they are desperately looking for a crack in the facade. When a jury sees boredom in the face of atrocity, they almost universally interpret it as a silent confession of cold-blooded sociopathic guilt.
Which brings us to the heaviest, most consequential part of our entire deep dive today. Because of this perfect storm of elements, the hypermodern technological premeditation, the primal brutality of the dismemberment, and the chilling, smug lack of remorse displayed in court, the stakes in this specific case have been elevated to the absolute maximum threshold of the American legal system.
We are talking about the potential for capital punishment.
Yes. Our primary source from True Crime News poses this question directly, right in the headline. Should D4vd get the death penalty if convicted? Now, before we dive into the mechanics of this, I need to state a strict rule reminder for our discussion.
Very important.
We must be explicitly clear here. We are not here to take a political, ethical, or moral stance on the death penalty. For you listening, our goal today is not to debate whether capital punishment is right or wrong. Our job is strictly to impartially report on the legal architecture of this case.
And to explain exactly why the media and legal scholars have made the death penalty a central focal point of this specific trial.
Exactly. So to understand that, we have to look at the strict legal mechanics of how a standard homicide charge escalates into a capital murder prosecution.
Right. In jurisdictions that retain the death penalty, the mere act of murder, even a deeply tragic one, is not automatically sufficient to trigger a capital trial. The state is legally required to prove the existence of specific statutory aggravating factors.
So break down the legal jargon for us. What does an aggravating factor actually mean in the context of D4vd and Celeste? What are the specific elements elevating this case?
Aggravating factors are specific circumstances surrounding the crime that elevate its severity, its cruelty, or its danger to society far beyond a standard homicide. They are the legal justifications for seeking the ultimate punishment.
Okay, so what are they looking at here?
In analyzing the media coverage and legal commentary surrounding this case, experts are pointing to three massive aggravating factors. First and foremost, the extreme level of premeditation.
The ChatGPT search logs.
Exactly. When a homicide occurs in the heat of passion, say, a sudden, uncontrollable bar fight that ends tragically, the law often views that differently than a calculated execution. By utilizing an AI to meticulously research and plan the logistics of the crime and the subsequent cover-up, the defense loses any ability to argue a loss of control.
Because it's a conversation. It takes time.
Yes. The AI logs prove cold, calculating logic. They prove he had the time to reflect, the time to stop his actions, and he actively chose to proceed.
It's premeditation printed in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what is the second aggravating factor legal experts are pointing to?
The second is the exceedingly gruesome nature of the physical crime itself, specifically focusing on the post-mortem treatment of the victim. The dismemberment details that were revealed during the pretrial hearings represent a level of bodily desecration and brutality that the legal statutes specifically categorize as exceptionally heinous, atrocious, and cruel.
So the law distinguishes between the act of killing and the active post-mortem desecration of the victim.
Yes, it does. It demonstrates a level of malice that goes beyond simply ending a life. It is an attempt to erase the victim's humanity entirely.
That's incredibly dark. And the third factor,
while technically more relevant to the penalty phase rather than the statutory charging phase, is his absolute callousness and lack of remorse.
The boredom in the courtroom.
Precisely. During the penalty phase of a capital trial, the jury must weigh the aggravating factors against any mitigating factors like a difficult childhood or mental illness.
Right, trying to find balance.
But if a jury believes that a defendant poses a continuing, permanent threat to society and demonstrates zero capacity for rehabilitation or remorse, which a bored, smug demeanor while viewing dismemberment photos strongly implies they are statistically far more likely to recommend the ultimate consequence.
So it really is this terrifying synthesis, the combination of high-tech, clinically calculated planning via artificial intelligence, the ancient primal brutality of the physical act, and the sociopathic detachment displayed in the aftermath. It creates this perfect legal and psychological storm where the death penalty naturally enters the forefront of the conversation.
It is the ultimate intersection of modern technological capability enabling premeditation and ancient, brutal human violence demanding consequence.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, pulling threads from across the entire true crime media landscape. Let's synthesize this journey we've been on. We started by centering the profound tragedy of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a young life cut short, and the shocking, jarring reality of her discovery inside a high-tech Tesla. a vehicle designed for clean energy and luxury transformed into a multi-ton data-logging tomb.
From there, we examined the sheer desperate absurdity of the physical cover-up. We contrasted the primitive, panicked use of mundane air fresheners with the sophisticated, inescapable environmental surveillance of the modern era, showing how criminals trap themselves when their cognitive load maxes out.
Then we unpacked the unprecedented, absolute technological bombshell of a modern suspect consulting ChatGPT to workshop a crime. We proved that the illusion of digital privacy is exactly that, an illusion, and that your friendly digital assistant can and will become the state's star witness, handing over the exact blueprints of your intent.
And finally, we confronted the chilling, visceral reality of the courtroom. We looked at where digital premeditation meets physical brutality, and how a defendant's arrogant, bored demeanor might ultimately seal his fate under the heavy, looming shadow of capital punishment.
For you listening to this right now, whether you're driving or working or just relaxing at home, we hope this deep dive highlights exactly why this specific case matters far beyond the sensational clickbait headlines.
It really is a bellwether case.
It isn't just a true crime story. It is a live-action demonstration of the rapid, terrifying evolution of crime and consequence. We are living in a brand new era where digital algorithms are replacing physical accomplices.
We are living in a world where the data your car quietly collects on your morning coffee run is the modern-day, unblinking eyewitness.
The X-ray machine of the justice system is no longer just a single photograph of a broken bone or a fingerprint on a glass. It is a billion lines of code, quietly waiting to be subpoenaed.
And that leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought for you to mull over as we close this out. Throughout this deep dive, we've seen artificial intelligence utilized as a tool by a suspect for planning, and we've seen its server logs utilized by the prosecution as hard evidence of intent.
Right.
But as AI becomes infinitely more sophisticated, vastly more integrated into our daily lives, and deeply trained to understand the nuances of human behavior, will we eventually see a court case where an AI is not just treated as a passive log of evidence, but is conceptually called to the stand as an active digital witness?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy concept.
Think about the trajectory of the technology here. If an AI is specifically designed to understand human intent, context, and nuance, could it soon be legally programmed to preemptively alert authorities the moment someone asks it a highly specific sequence of questions about how to conceal a crime?
So not just recording the crime, but actively preventing it.
Exactly. Are we rapidly approaching a Minority Report style of digital surveillance, where the algorithm flags the criminal intent, alerts law enforcement, and intervenes before the physical act even occurs? And if so, what does that mean for our fundamental concepts of privacy and free will?
That is an incredibly chilling thought to leave on. The digital oracle not just answering your darkest questions, but actively reporting you to the authorities for daring to ask them. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We truly appreciate you taking the time to unpack these complex, terrifying, and rapidly changing waters with us. Stay safe out there, be incredibly mindful of your digital footprint, and we will see you next time.